Every Sunday, the ornate dining room fills with the clatter of silverware and the low murmur of polite conversation. But beneath it all simmers a tension I've learned to swallow like bitter medicine. I sit near the end of the long mahogany table, a quiet fixture amid the chaos, the invisible provider who holds this family's fragile facade together. They see me as the wallet, never the woman. For 5 years I've paid Mark's rent, $200 every month, $72,000 poured into a bottomless pit, without so much as a nod of gratitude. I'm the responsible one, the family's financial backbone, the silent caretaker who keeps the wheels turning while everyone else takes their seats to judge. My father, Evan Roberts, presides at the head of the table, a man who watches the daily abuses but chooses silence, wrapped in a cocoon of avoidance that costs me far more than he realizes. His eyes rarely meet mine. He'd rather pretend my pain doesn't exist than confront the storm brewing under his own roof. I've spent decades mastering the art of invisibility, blending into the background like some necessary fixture no one questions. But beneath this practiced calm lies a secret power. My knowledge of every ledger, every hidden debt, every legal vulnerability. It's a skill I honed as a senior accountant, balancing nonprofit books with surgical precision. I keep it locked away, a quiet shield against the family's relentless demands. Still, with each passing Sunday, exhaustion seeps deeper into my bones. The polished silver and crystal glasses reflect the cold truth. I'm more than their ATM, but I'm not sure how to prove it yet. The familiar din of laughter and cutting remarks swirls around me. I breathe in the scent of Elaine's expensive perfume, mingled with roasting chicken, the warmth of candlelight flickering across faces I've loved and resented in equal measure. This room is a battlefield, and for now, I'm the lone soldier enduring the war. I remember sitting at that same table 15 years ago, a different girl with raw wounds and open eyes. It was Mark's 18th birthday, an event no one in the family would forget. The evening was drenched in champagne and applause, his name sung with pride as his friends brought gifts worth thousands of dollars. I, on the other hand, received a simple thank you card from Elaine for babysitting her friends' children that week. The card was polite, handwritten in careful script, but it felt like a slap in the face. I tucked it away in my room, the stark contrast between Mark's lavish celebration and my quiet acknowledgement cementing a cruel truth. I was invisible, the scapegoat who carried burdens no one else would lift. Elaine's favoritism was the needle sewing this toxic quilt, praise heaped on Mark for his natural talent and ambition, while I was dismissed as unmotivated, a disappointment wrapped in good intentions. I asked my father for help once, my voice trembling with hope. "Dad, why does she always get the spotlight? Why don't I matter?" His eyes flickered with discomfort, but he only shrugged, muttering, "Family dynamics are complicated, honey. No one stood up for me." That night I learned that peace for my father meant sacrifice for me. The echoes of that unresolved pain have haunted every family gathering since, layering exhaustion with an unyielding determination to find worth on my own terms. I told myself I was strong enough to bear it, that their need for me justified the pain. Still, the weight pressed down, a reminder that sometimes love hurts more when it's silent. Over the years, I've given everything: money, time, energy, with no expectation of repayment, only the faint hope of respect. Mark's rent alone has drained my accounts for half a decade. I've covered car repairs, legal fees, and even Julia's extravagant wedding expenses, amounting to tens of thousands of dollars. $15,000 for the wedding alone, a sum I never hinted at asking back. Behind the scenes, I shelved my own dreams, postponing retirement savings and ignoring my growing health issues to care for my aging parents. Simon, my husband and quiet champion, watches this all unfold with a mixture of frustration and sorrow. He sees the toll it takes on me and gently pushes me to recognize my worth, to fight for boundaries I've long avoided. But I hesitate, tangled in years of codependency and silent suffering. My secret weapon remains my expertise, a deep understanding of finances and the law that I guard like a hidden dagger. I've built a network of contacts, a safety net woven from knowledge and patience. Yet every time I extend a hand, the family's response is entitlement or disdain. They treat generosity like weakness, assuming I'll always be there. the endless reserve. It's a bitter realization. I am the foundation, but no one acknowledges the architecture. The invisible labor doubles as emotional armor, but cracks are beginning to show. The weight of invisibility grows heavier with each insult, each demand, each whispered slight. This past Sunday was no different, yet the sting cut deeper than usual. Elaine, with her voice dripping honeyed venom, mocked my boring job in front of neighbors and cousins alike. Accounting? What a dull life, Victoria. No wonder you're still single. Too busy crunching numbers to live. The laughter that followed was sharp and cold. Evan kept his gaze fixed on his plate, silent as always, while Mark smirked, and Julia leaned in to whisper cruel comments just loud enough for me to hear. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in as humiliation bloomed in my chest. I tasted the bitterness of their contempt, but I swallowed it down, reminding myself, they don't mean it. It's just their way. Even as the words pierced, a tiny voice inside questioned my silence. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to retort, to shatter the facade and reclaim my dignity. But years of conditioning held me back, the fear of escalating conflict a heavy chain. Instead, I sat still, feeling the sting but refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. It was a small victory, but one that left me hollow. The pattern was clear. They would strike, and I would endure. Yet beneath the surface, a seed of doubt took root. Maybe silence was no longer enough. Maybe I was more than the sum of their scorn. The war continued at that table, but something inside me whispered that the game was changing. The subtle shift was almost imperceptible at first, but I felt it like a chill creeping up my spine. Evan's eyes, usually so carefully averted, flicked toward me with a faint hardness. I caught the barely noticeable nod he gave Elaine across the room. It was as if he were silently signaling the troops to tighten the noose. The family's tone at the next Sunday dinner was different. Sharp, calculated, like a pack closing in. Elaine wasted no time. Her voice, sweet and venomous, sliced through the chatter as she whispered loudly enough for the nearest cousins to hear. You know, Victoria's been quite reckless at work lately. Heard she's making some questionable decisions with those nonprofit accounts. The implication hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Mark jumped in, his smirk wide and unapologetic. Maybe she should mind her own business instead of poking around our family's spending. Overstepping, if you ask me. Julia's phone buzzed constantly, and I soon realized she was sending disparaging texts to relatives and in-laws alike, painting me as paranoid and ungrateful. I caught snippets when I glanced down, words like delusional and controlling scrawled in sharp shorthand. The gaslighting was insidious. When I finally confronted Evan privately, pleading for clarity, he shrugged with a dismissive smile and said, "Victoria, you're imagining things. This is just normal family teasing." His words hit like a slap, denying my reality, framing me as the unstable one. Flying monkeys emerged swiftly. Distant cousins, old family friends, even Simon's acquaintances who had met me only in passing. They began whispering away behind my back, carefully plotting their alliances. Invitations to social events stopped coming. Messages went unanswered. I became an island in a sea of judgment and suspicion. I fought back in my own way, recording conversations, saving texts, building a silent dossier. But outwardly, I grew quieter, more withdrawn, careful not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. The weight of isolation pressed down, heavier with each passing day. Evan sat back and watched it all unfold, his passivity and unspoken consent to their cruelty. The family's teeth were bared now, and there was no turning back. I thought maybe if I could just talk, it would end. So I asked for a family meeting, hoping to bring some light into the dark corners of this unraveling mess. I gathered my courage and presented the facts. Cold, hard numbers laid bare. I showed them the $120,000 I had given Mark over the past decade, the $15,000 funneled quietly to Julia's wedding, the countless hours of caregiving I'd poured in, worth more than $50,000 if I put a price on it. I asked for acknowledgement, for respect, for boundaries. The room, filled with familiar faces, turned hostile. Elaine's smile sharpened into a sneer. "Oh, so now you want credit for being the family ATM?" she snapped. voice dripping with sarcasm. Before I could respond, Mark cut in, his tone mocking. "This is just Victoria's way of stirring drama. Always the victim." Evan, as usual, avoided my gaze, silent and immovable. Simon tried to support me, but the family politely dismissed him, framing him as an outsider meddling in things he didn't understand. Even the cousin I'd invited to mediate seemed overwhelmed, unable or unwilling to challenge the tide. "You need to be more flexible, Victoria," the cousin advised weakly, as if my patience was the problem. I left that room hollow, my hopes crushed beneath the weight of their refusal to change. They weren't interested in peace. They were interested in maintaining control, and Evan's silence was the foundation they stood on. The family's walls closed in tighter, and I realized that gentle words and calm reasoning were not enough to shatter this fortress of cruelty. The next blow came at a cousin's wedding, a gathering meant for celebration, but which quickly turned into a stage for public humiliation. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but I felt the eyes of the family on me like cold daggers. Elaine took the microphone with a practiced smile and announced the creation of a family fund, $20,000 to support Mark's new business venture. Every relative present was encouraged to contribute, except me. I sat frozen, disbelief and hurt battling inside me. When I finally spoke up, my voice barely above a whisper, Elaine snapped, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "Jealousy suits you, Victoria. It's pathetic." Julia circled like a vulture, whispering venom to anyone who would listen. "She's trying to control everything again," I overheard her say, turning influential guests against me. Mark openly dismissed my input about the family's finances, sneering in front of friends and distant relatives. The sting of embarrassment was sharp and public. My credibility, painstakingly built over years, crumbled beneath their scorn. I was excluded from conversations and decisions that had once been mine to oversee, left to watch the family's future being shaped without me. The social and financial damage was real and devastating. I clutched my napkin tightly, fighting the urge to cry, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound I'd felt before. Yet beneath the surface, I held on to my composure, the battle between my hurt and my determination raging silently inside. After that night, I knew I had to try one last time. I approached Elaine privately, my voice steady but pleading. "I need boundaries," I said clearly. "I can't keep giving and being invisible. I need respect. And I need us to find a way to share responsibilities fairly." I laid out concrete solutions, reimbursement plans for the money I'd lent, scheduled family meetings to discuss finances transparently, shared caregiving duties for Mom and Dad. Her response was a cold, dismissive laugh. "You'll always be the forgotten one, Victoria, because you choose to be," she said, eyes flashing with contempt. Mark overheard and immediately mocked me in front of the household staff later that day, turning my attempt at reconciliation into a public joke. Julia warned me to stop rocking the boat, her voice low and threatening. "Keep pushing, and you'll be completely alone." Evan said nothing, standing silently in the background, his passivity a painful betrayal I could no longer ignore. I felt the line had been crossed. No more subtle exclusions, no more smiling through the pain. Their rejection was not just refusal, it was cruelty. I walked away from that confrontation with a heavy heart, but a fierce new clarity. This was my last olive branch. If it broke, there would be no going back. The silence that followed Elaine's decree was suffocating, a vacuum that swallowed the last remnants of my hope. The family's verdict was clear. I was persona non grata, exiled from Sunday dinners, the very heartbeats of our fractured family. Elaine's cold words, "No more drama, Victoria," echoed in my mind, a cruel decree that severed my ties to the only semblance of normalcy I had left. Mark and Julia, my siblings and supposed allies, had withdrawn into curt, clipped messages, each one a dagger that reminded me how thin my thread of connection had become. Their avoidance wasn't just distance, it was deliberate erasure. The wider family, once a network of shared history and reluctant support, receded too, swayed by Elaine's whispered accusations and Julia's social machinations. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations ceased. I was shrinking into an island of solitude. my voice drowned by a chorus that refused to hear me. I could feel self-doubt seep into my bones like a slow poison. Had I really been the problem all along? Was my relentless giving just a burden to them? My reflection in the window showed a woman drained, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, shoulders slumped beneath invisible weight. The ledger of my sacrifices, money, time, care, felt like a ledger writ in blood, tallying debts no one would honor. Simon, ever watchful, sensed the unraveling. One evening, as I sat curled on the couch, face buried in my hands, he gently urged, "Victoria, maybe it's time to talk to someone. You don't have to carry this alone." His words were balm, but the shame clung tightly. Seeking help felt like admitting defeat, but the alternative, this suffocating isolation, was worse. Financial strain tightened its grip. Years of supporting Mark's stalled ventures, Julia's indulgences, and my parents' needs had depleted my reserves. Legal battles over minor disputes had added bills I could barely cover. The quiet theft by Evan, the man I called father, remained hidden for now, but his cold indifference was palpable. He offered no refuge, no comforting word, only the same passive gaze that had abandoned me at every turning point. The house felt colder, not from winter, but from the absence of warmth and solidarity. I was left to wrestle with the heavy truth. My family had painted me as the villain, the troublemaker, the one to blame. The isolation was complete, a fortress of silence around a heart that still dared to beat. In this abyss, I reached a fragile, trembling nadir, wondering if I could endure much longer. That Sunday dinner had always been my tether, but now it was the scene of my undoing. Elaine's calculated cruelty sliced through the room, her voice steady and merciless as she slid the packet toward me. The legal waiver was more than paper. It was a severing of ties, a demand to abandon any claim to what was rightfully mine. My hands shook, the weight of years crushed into this moment. I glanced around the table, searching for a flicker of support. There was none. Evan sat silent, a ghost in his own home, refusing to intervene. Mark's smirk was a blade, his mocking whisper, "Make your choice, loser," a final venomous jab. The room held its breath, waiting for my capitulation. Inside, something fractured, a brittle, hidden part of me that had clung to hope now splintered irreparably. This wasn't rejection, it was war. The air tasted metallic, thick with betrayal. My mind raced, grappling with the enormity of the insult, the erasure of my years of sacrifice. Just as despair threatened to engulf me, Simon's cough broke the spell. From the corner, the lawyer's calm voice cut through the tension, revealing a recorded confession of coercion. Gasps rippled through the room, shattering the facade of control Elaine had wielded so expertly. The family's smugness faltered, eyes darting, faces tightening. For the first time, the balance shifted. The moment transformed me, from a battered victim into a strategist, fueled by the raw power of evidence and the cold fire of betrayal. Later, in the quiet aftermath, I sat alone, the weight of the day settling like dust on my skin. Memories cascaded, decades of invisible labor, financial support that had bled me dry, countless moments where my voice was silenced or twisted. Anger simmered beneath my exhaustion, a slow-burning heat that sharpened my vision. The pattern was unmistakable. My family thrived on my compliance, erasing my existence to feed their entitlement. The wounds cut deep, but beneath the pain a new clarity emerged. I opened my journal, the blank pages waiting like a canvas for truth. I listed every dollar lent, every insult swallowed, every plea ignored. The numbers and words piled up, a testament to my endurance and their disregard. Simon sat quietly beside me, his steady presence a lifeline in the storm. My internal voice, once filled with doubt, now echoed with resolve. Never again. The realization settled like cold steel. No more would I be their ATM, their invisible caretaker, their doormat. The awakening was painful, but purifying, a shedding of the self that had bent and broken for too long. Instead of fiery confrontation, I chose a different path, cold withdrawal, a strategic silence that would protect me without feeding their chaos. It was liberation in stillness, a reclaiming of self through quiet strength. The journey ahead would demand patience and precision, but I was ready to step into this new role. That night, under the dim glow of the study lamp, Simon and I spoke in hushed tones, the weight of my decision settling between us. "It's time they feel what it's like without me," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside. Simon nodded, his support unwavering. Together, we sketched a plan, not one born of rage, but of calculated resolve. Financial support would taper off, boundaries would harden, and emotional ties would be guarded with care. This wasn't about revenge through chaos. It was about survival through control. I would deny them access to my resources, my time, my care, not with noise or fury, but with firm, deliberate withdrawal. We forged a pact in that quiet room. No longer their safety net, no longer their invisible guardian. The first step in active resistance was set, a blueprint for reclaiming my dignity piece by piece. Simon's presence was a balm, his legal expertise a shield as we prepared to dismantle the toxic patterns that had defined my life. Calm replaced desperation. Strategy replaced submission. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in years, I was no longer fighting blind. This was my stand, my moment to rewrite the story they had penned for me. The night air was cool against my skin as I closed the journal, the words inside a promise to myself, never again. I found myself hunched over the kitchen table late into the night, a growing stack of papers spread before me, bank statements, loan agreements, caregiving schedules, and scribbled notes. The quiet house felt heavy, the silence pressing in as I methodically mapped out the extent of their dependence on me. Mark's monthly rent alone was a glaring figure, $200 a month, paid from my account without a single repayment in years. Julia's unpaid loans were buried in dusty folders, their total creeping toward $15,000, untouched and unacknowledged. More than the money, I tallied the time and energy I poured into Mom and Dad's care. Rides to doctors, medication management, grocery runs, caregiving duties worth upwards of $40,000 annually if priced fairly. These weren't just favors. They were lifelines, and I was the sole provider. I reached out to my trusted financial advisor the next day, sitting across from her in a sunlit office where her calm voice cut through my swirling doubts. She confirmed what I had suspected all along. This family's entire financial ecosystem was fragile and reliant almost entirely on my income and credit lines. Every informal loan, every unpaid bill, every caregiving errand was a thread woven through my steadiness. Without me, the whole tapestry would unravel. I gathered bank statements confirming the seamless flow of funds from my accounts to theirs, unsigned promissory notes that held no legal weight, and caregiving schedules that illustrated my invisible labor. It was a silent inventory of power, one I had not fully realized I wielded. The realization was sobering, yet strangely empowering. My secret power, as I began to think of it, was the control I held over financial and emotional levers they took for granted. They had built their lives on my quiet compliance, assuming the river of support would never stop flowing. I pictured the chaos if I were to pull back. Mark scrambling to cover rent, Julia forced to confront debts she'd long ignored, Mom and Dad left to fend for themselves without their unpaid caretaker. The thought sent a shiver through me, an icy mix of fear and fierce determination. This wasn't about punishment. Not yet. It was about reclaiming space, setting boundaries where none had existed. I folded the papers carefully, the weight of numbers and names settling into my bones. The plan was forming, quiet but unyielding. Back at home, I kept the facade intact. The family saw nothing of the storm brewing behind my calm eyes. At Sunday dinner, I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the dutiful daughter, the normal one, all while my mind cataloged every financial tether and emotional obligation I had carried for years. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a strategist, quietly gathering ammunition for the first move in a game they had been playing against me for decades. The knowledge of their reliance gave me a strange new confidence, one rooted not in anger, but in clarity. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, But the silent mapping of vulnerabilities was the crucial first step. The family had assumed I was interchangeable, but I was not, and soon, they would have to face that truth. The days that followed were a study in quiet transformation. I began changing the passwords on all my financial accounts, locking down the doors they had casually walked through for so long. Credit cards that had been shared with Mark and Julia were canceled without announcement, their numbers invalidated silently. Automatic payments, those invisible threads that funneled money to family expenses, were redirected or stopped. Each small act was a brick laid in a wall of firm boundaries. Legally, Simon and I worked on formalizing these changes, drafting letters that could be sent if the family crossed lines I was about to draw. He urged patience, reminding me this was a chess game, not a brawl. At work, I secured my files with renewed vigilance, aware that any leak could give them an early warning, but each move was masked with calm professionalism. At Sunday dinners, I listened and smiled, careful not to betray the quiet storm swirling beneath my composed exterior. Their careless jokes and thinly veiled barbs slid off me now like water on glass. I was still the daughter they knew, but the woman beneath had shifted, detached, controlled, prepared. The gulf between who they thought I was and who I was becoming widened with each passing day. The tension was palpable but unseen. Family members whispered about my coldness, my sudden distance, but no one suspected the extent of what I was preparing. The withdrawal was deliberate, surgical, designed to unsettle without provoking open confrontation. I imagined their confusion as the safety net I had always provided began to fray. Yet to them, it would be framed as anger, as a momentary lapse, not the strategic withdrawal it truly was. I held firm, focused on the quiet countdown to change. Every locked account, every redirected payment was another step toward reclaiming my life. One evening, as I sat reviewing bank statements to finalize the last of the account changes, my breath caught on a line I hadn't expected. Multiple transfers, small but regular, totaling $35,000 over the past 5 years, had quietly slipped out of my personal accounts to a recipient I didn't recognize. The dates coincided with family events, moments when money was tight and I was stretched thin. Heart pounding, I traced the trail of these unauthorized transactions, cross-referencing every detail. The name that emerged was impossible to ignore. Evan Roberts, my own father, the man who had always stood silently to the side, watching abuse unfold, had been stealing from me all along. Shock crashed over me first, a cold wave that left me numb. Then came the anger, searing and relentless. How could he? The man who had enabled their cruelty with his silence had been betraying my trust in the most intimate way. I confronted him privately, voice steady but fierce, laying out the evidence like a scalpel cutting through years of denial. He stammered, offering weak excuses about family expenses and misunderstandings, but I recorded every word. Simon urged immediate legal action, but we agreed on strategic patience, maximizing leverage rather than rushing into confrontation. This revelation reframed everything. Evan was not merely a passive bystander. He was an active participant in my exploitation. The theft was a betrayal that cut deeper than any snide remark or exclusion. It was proof of the family's profound entitlement, and my own naivety in trusting them. The balance of power shifted sharply in my favor, fueling my resolve to withdraw completely. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was holding them accountable. The weight of this secret burned in my chest, a cold fire igniting my plan into full motion. The next morning, I began the first moves of execution. Letters went out to Mark and Julia, formal notices terminating all financial support and demanding repayment of outstanding loans totaling $25,000. I canceled caregiving visits, outsourcing mom and dad's care to professional services, a decision that sent shockwaves through the household. At Sunday dinner, I was met with stunned silence and barely concealed fury. Texts and calls flooded my phone, desperate pleas and threats, but I held firm, refusing to engage. I blocked shared credit cards and closed joint accounts, severing the financial umbilical cord that had tethered us for years. The family scrambled to understand the sudden change, but none connected the dots to Evan's theft. To them, I was simply angry, lashing out without cause. Mark faced eviction threats for the first time in years without my rent subsidy. Julia's social standing began to fray as she lost access to the financial buffer I had quietly maintained. Elaine's cold eyes held disbelief, but no apology. Evan avoided my gaze, the weight of his deception unspoken but palpable. I felt a mix of sadness and resolve, a mourning for the family I had hoped we could be, and a fierce determination to protect myself. The quiet upheaval unsettled them more than any confrontation could have. The withdrawal was clinical, deliberate, a silent reckoning that left no room for negotiation. They were forced to confront the consequences of their dependence on me, something they had never truly acknowledged. As I stood firm, a strange calm settled over me. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time, I was no longer the passive victim. The withdrawal was just beginning, but already its tremors shook the foundations of a family long built on my silent sacrifice. The day Elaine called the meeting, the air hung thick with tension, each step toward the old family home feeling heavier than the last. I arrived not alone, but with Simon and a legal representative in tow, a silent declaration that this was no ordinary gathering. The house buzzed with whispered speculation. The extended relatives gathered in the living room under the heavy gaze of the family lawyer, eyes flicking to me with a mix of curiosity and unease. Elaine's forced smile faltered as I laid out the evidence, bank statements revealing Evan's furtive siphoning of my accounts, the precise amounts traced and documented, a betrayal made tangible. I spoke clearly, my voice steady, every word measured. I am no longer your bank, your caregiver, or your emotional punching bag. The room stilled, disbelief etched on every face. Evan's pale complexion betrayed the guilt I had long known he harbored but never confronted. Elaine sputtered, her usual grip on control slipping as denial mingled with shock. Mark opened his mouth to interrupt, but the lawyer's sharp interjection silenced him, citing the recorded coercion that laid bare years of manipulation. Julia's smugness dissolved into wide-eyed surprise, her social armor cracking under the weight of truth. I held their stares without flinching, the calm authority in my tone a stark contrast to the chaos they expected. Boundaries were drawn in iron. No more financial handouts, no more emotional exploitation, and a warning that any harassment would be met with legal action. The finality in my words was as crisp as the champagne cork that would have popped in celebration. My moment of reclaiming power. When I turned on my heel and walked out, the house seemed to sag under the weight of what had just transpired. Heads hung low, murmurs replaced the usual barbs, and the family was left grappling with the loss of their quiet supplier of financial and emotional sustenance. Outside, the cool air kissed my cheeks, a balm against the storm inside. This wasn't vengeance. It was a reclaiming of self, a decisive cut in the tangled web of sacrifice and neglect. I no longer carried the burden of their entitlement. For the first time in decades, I stood unshackled, dignity intact, my steps light, despite the heaviness of what had been revealed. The family meeting was over, but my journey toward freedom had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, the repercussions rippled through the family like a tremor shaking fragile foundations. Evan, once the passive enabler, found himself under scrutiny not just from me, but from wary relatives who began to question his silence and complicity. The theft revelation was a blow that reverberated beyond our immediate circle. Whispers of legal consequences swirled, and the man who had lived in comfortable avoidance was now forced into uncomfortable reckoning. Mark's financial house of cards began to crumble. Without my steady support, overdue notices piled up, and social invitations dwindled. Julia's carefully curated reputation faltered as in-laws and friends caught wind of her precarious standing, the buffer of my support evaporating. Elaine's frantic calls and hollow apologies flooded my phone, desperate attempts to salvage the facade of harmony. I met each with quiet dismissal, maintaining a professional distance that was as much protection as punishment. Their love-bombing and false conciliations were transparent, empty gestures against the fortress of boundaries I had erected. The family's social and financial stability, once propped up by my unseen labor, began to unravel. In this chaos, Simon became my anchor, our shared struggles knitting us closer, his unwavering support a steady flame in the gathering darkness. I turned my focus inward, prioritizing my health and career goals, the rebuilding of a life that had long been overshadowed by obligation. The fallout was real and raw, but I remained resolute. The costs they bore a direct consequence of their own choices, and my refusal to be their crutch any longer. Desperation bred a final, frantic volley of manipulation from Elaine and Julia. They rallied allies, relatives and family friends, to serve as flying monkeys, bombarding me with guilt-laced messages, veiled threats, and public smears designed to fracture my resolve. Legal countersuits were threatened, character assassinations whispered behind closed doors, and passive-aggressive barbs surfaced on social media. Mark's subtle digs masquerading as concern, but I anticipated each move, fortified by legal injunctions that Simon helped secure, blocking harassment before it could take root. Every message was documented, every attempt catalogued, transforming their attacks into evidence of their desperation. Simon's meticulous management of digital and physical boundaries became a bulwark against their increasing isolation. Evan, exposed and shamed, retreated into silence, his complicity a heavy shroud that silenced him more effectively than any words. The family's last attempts at control crumbled against the bedrock of my preparedness and calm strength. Their world shrank, their tactics growing more futile with each failed ploy. The desperation was palpable in their eyes during rare interactions, yet I held firm, unyielding, dignified, no longer the invisible woman they had tormented, but a force to be reckoned with. Months later, I found myself basking in a Sunday afternoon suffused with peace, a luxury once unimaginable. The sun streamed through the windows as Simon and I shared quiet laughter with close friends, the carefree moments a stark contrast to the years of turmoil. Financial security had been painstakingly reclaimed, over $50,000 in loans were recovered, and formal agreements now governed elder care services, replacing the unpaid labor that had drained me. Boundaries were clear and respected, no unsolicited contact, no financial entanglements without contracts. Evan's theft case moved forward in the courts, his restitution a public acknowledgement of betrayal, while Mark and Julia faded into the background, their dependence shattered and their distance a testament to the new order. Sitting alone that evening, I opened my journal, the one that had borne witness to my journey from invisible scapegoat to empowered woman. I traced my pen over the page and wrote, "I am more than what they took from me. I am enough." The words felt like a release, a promise not to the family that had long defined me, but to the self I was finally embracing. In solitude, I found strength. In detachment, peace. The toxic dynamics that had once consumed my life were now threads I had severed with quiet resolve. The road ahead was open, a canvas for the life I chose to paint, one of dignity, resilience, and hope. The past no longer held me captive. I was free.